21 masterclasses in new consciousness, new ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you. Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world. Hello, Om Shanti, and welcome to today's masterclass, one of 21 masterclasses in new consciousness, a whole series looking at new ways of thinking, of being and of doing in today's rapidly changing world. Now, of course, all of us are doing our best to try and observe all the current regulations that are there for our physical safety, to keep us safe. But are we equally attentive to the spiritual laws that operate to help us feel calm and protected and safe from within? Well, one of the consequences of the coronavirus lockdown is that we've all of us had more time to sit with ourselves, to sit with our own thoughts. And whether that has been a stressful and distressing experience for you, or whether it's actually been a positive experience, one thing is for certain, and that is that questions will have come up for you. Questions about maybe how you used to live your life before the lockdown, maybe questions around how you want to change your life going forwards. And some people may have had questions arising as to who they are when they sit with themselves, or possibly even around what is it that we experience when we sit in quiet contemplation. There's very often a sense of there being a beautiful and profound experience that feels like it's part of us in some way, but also feels like it's something other, like we're tapping into some other kind of energy source. And that's our theme for today. We're looking at the real support, the eternal source. Now, all of our speakers in this series are students and teachers of the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University. And as that name suggests, it's a university for the spirit. It's a place for learning about the self, for understanding the soul. It's an organization that has teaching centers in over 110 countries right across the world and has an active presence in even more countries than that. It was founded in India in 1936 when a series of visions and teachings came through, kind of almost from beyond, came through the original founder, Brahma. And he decided quite early on that he was going to put women very much to the fore. And so the Brahma Kumaris is now the largest organization of its kind that is led by women. But the teachings that came through back in 1936 felt then and feel very much now as if they are relevant to this transitional phase that we're going through, this period of profound and rapid change. So today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the divine. And of course it was inevitable at some point in this series of masterclasses that we would be turning to this subject. We've looked already at questions of the self, understanding the self, how to take ourselves into a beautiful experience so that we can really feel the original qualities of the self. We can feel that quality of peace, of love, of happiness, and maybe even of bliss. But research has consistently shown that people do admit to having a sense of something greater than themselves, that there is some power beyond themselves that they experience. And whether you call that the source of guidance, you might refer to it as a guardian angel, you might feel it to be maybe a spirit guide, you might see it as being some sort of eternal spirit or being that is there for you, guiding you, helping you feel protected. What exactly is that? So today we want to really look into that question and try and answer for ourselves what that means to us. And our guide on this journey is someone who has truly walked the path of creating new consciousness. His name is Charlie Hogg. He's from Five Docks in Sydney, Australia, where he is the national coordinator for the Brahma Kumaris, coordinating the work of over 40 centres throughout Australia. Charlie also travels extensively around the world. He's very much in demand as a speaker. He's been to over 80 countries now, sharing insights and wisdom from his own spiritual journey. And in fact, Charlie was one of the very first Westerners that encountered the Brahma Kumaris back in 1975, when he was off on his travels through Asia, through the Middle East, and through Europe. And he ended up in London, and it was there that he met a real powerhouse of a yogi, a woman who had been involved with the Brahma Kumaris right from the very beginning, back in 1936, 1937. Her name was Daddy Janki, and she went on to become the spiritual head of the Brahma Kumaris until she died in March 2020, not that long ago, at the age of 104. So Charlie, welcome so much to Masterclasses. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Philippa. It's really lovely to be with you.
Now, it must have been quite a strange encounter with Daddy Janki, because she hadn't left India before. It was her first time abroad. She hadn't really met Westerners. And on top of that, she had had sort of decades of being in silence and meditation. And then suddenly she comes across this, no doubt, sort of hairy hippie type who was asking her questions. What was that experience of meeting Daddy Janki like for you?
You know, it's quite vivid in my mind because I had been traveling for a few years in Southeast Asia, in India, in the Middle East, in Africa. And you know, I was on a search like so many of us. And I realized after a while it really was my inner journey, my inner search. And I lived with Buddhists and Hindus and yogis and Muslims during Ramadan and Christians, I think all the major paths. And a big question came for me: how do you really experience, whether it's God or in meditation? And when I saw Daddy Janki, immediately I could see on her face that she was experiencing something. It just glowed through her eyes and her face. So that really touched me, and it was like a message to me: I want some of this myself.
So had you really had quite an in-depth experience of other ways of looking at God and understanding God through your travels and through your explorations?
You know, I grew up in Melbourne, and I would say my family wasn't a religious family at all. Though they sent me off to be confirmed when I was 12 years old. You know how families are. And when I did my confirmation classes, I remember my parents asking, "What have you learnt?" And I announced to the family, "I think I'm an atheist," because I found it at that very young age, obviously an immature mind, but the God at least I was presented with at that time, and maybe it was my perception, was a very authoritarian, judgmental, sort of punishing personality. And I couldn't really connect with it. But as I began to travel my journey across the world, living in religious communities, I began to say I'm an agnostic. I'm open, but I really just don't know, who is God. I was really open to learning about God.
If you think, though, of the journey of most Westerners, and if you look at our history in Europe and many of our great nations, the whole quest for understanding God has been a massive source of conflict. People have lost their lives, thousands and thousands of lives, in this pursuit of this understanding. So it's no wonder, in a way, that we have this reticence when we come to this whole subject of trying to understand God, because somewhere in our psyche it doesn't feel safe to really explore or even openly discuss what we feel.
Yes. It's probably the biggest question in history, really. And I remember once I was in Bombay, and a professor of religion told me that something like 75% of all wars were begun. They were religious wars. And, for me personally, in my own journey, actually, I really love the faiths, but for me to really connect with God, I had to separate religion from God. Because sometimes I used to feel that religions had been like the advertising agencies for God, you know. And the image which, at least me and from my education where I was sitting, the image I received wasn't a very positive image. And so later on I realized when I became an atheist, it was really rejecting religion rather than rejecting God, I feel. And I feel so many of us in the Western world are a little bit like that. It's actually the institutions representing God that people have a little bit of difficulty with, and that's why we throw everything out together. And I think I was a bit like that.
It is also really, when it comes to understanding the nature of the divine, there really is quite a smorgasbord on offer of different ways of understanding. If I just go through the different approaches, on the one hand, we've got the position of atheism, which is that there is no God. We then have the position of pantheism, which is that God is everywhere. God is around us, in all places. We then have panentheism, which is that God is in all matter. God is in every particle, is in every tree, every atom, and therefore God is in us as well. And then we have all the different ideas around monotheism, which is, around God being love, around God being light, around God being someone who is all knowledgeable, who can kind of cast thunderbolts and make things happen and intervene in human activity. So how would you advise someone who is really questioning and wanting to explore and discover this? How do you navigate through all of these very different ways of seeing God? What's a good place to start?
I think each one of us is on our own journey, and perhaps my own experience is fairly typical in one sense, that I began as an atheist. As I traveled, I became an agnostic. I was really open, but definitely confused by everything. And it was really when I reached London that I really wanted to meditate. I really wanted to practice something. And in my meditation, I had an experience. And I had an incredible experience of connection with God, with the divine. And I felt just absorbed in a purity of love that I can't describe. And that was just such a unique experience for me. It just inspired me to explore more. And so I think you can only say that try to move through all the intellectual, gravity that seems to hold you down, so many ideas, and step into your own practice and try to experience God for yourself. Because when I was able to do that, it really motivated me to go deeper and deeper and explore this relationship.
But how did you know that what you were experiencing was the divine and not just an aspect of your own higher consciousness, or not just maybe a guardian angel or your mother or some relative who died who's looking down on you and giving you an experience? What was it about that made you really feel that you were connecting with the divine source?
Yeah, it's a really lovely question, because I was offered two ideas to practice. One was to experiment with myself as an eternal soul, a minute spark of life energy that sits in the front of the brain. That's me, the permanent self, and I sit in the body, the temporary self. And I actually found that the more I could step back and withdraw, in a sense, from my temporary identity and step into my permanent self, and then look through the eye of the mind to meet the Supreme, there was such a sense of connection, a sense of relationship, a sense of belonging. And I suppose nothing I can't prove, but my experience of love was, I would say, the pinnacle experience of my life. This purity of union, which I feel is in the DNA of the human spirit. And I feel that we search for this even in our relationships with each other, which I did, like everybody. But I tasted a union, I tasted a connection, I tasted a relationship that was so profoundly life-changing for me that I've been on this journey ever since. And, you know, looking at myself now, I could have never imagined it, to be very honest, that I would really be, if I can say, in love with God, that God is my lover, and this is the experience that I enjoy virtually, you know, every morning of my life, every day of my life.
Would you say that it's almost a part of the process that you have to go through, where you almost have to act as if something were true? You have to momentarily suspend your disbelief, possibly, and be prepared to enter into the possibility of there being something there. And even though it might feel foolish or you might feel silly, just try and see what happens if you reach out and either talk or pray or do whatever comes naturally to you, but have the intention of making some kind of connection and just see what comes from that.
Yes, I think that's, you know, fairly true in a way. To me, there's like 3 steps. There's the knowing, the believing, and the experiencing. And actually, when I learnt this idea, was offered this idea that I'm the eternal soul, and quite a clear introduction of the self, it rang true. You know, when an intuitive truth just, it hits home. And even the idea that I'm a soul that's taken birth and rebirth, I've reaped the fruits of my actions, I know happiness and sorrow. But there is a soul out there that's beyond that game of happiness and sorrow. And in a sense, you can say meditation, or this relationship with God, is connecting with that soul. And often, I remember once someone in Europe told me, a psychologist, that they did an experiment about telepathy. And she and a friend, they kept little books in their pockets, and whenever they thought of each other, they wrote it down. They'd synchronize watches, and 70% were accurate. You know, our thoughts have an energy. Our thoughts are instant. And why I'm saying this is, it's not that I'm just believing in some sort of concept. There's an actual, real connection. But in saying that, you have to experiment, because the first step is to know, the second step is to believe, the next 998 steps are educating myself how to transform that knowing into a rich feeling inside, which is really like that relationship or that sense of connection and belonging, a real sense that, yes, I'm in union with God.
You're talking about God or the divine, whatever word you're using, as a soul. And that for some people might be quite a strange concept, because whilst we're used to thinking of ourselves as a soul, that there is something that survives when we die and is reborn or whatever happens, to think of God as being a soul seems a little bit strange. How is God different from us in terms of being a soul? What are the things that make us different rather than being the same?
You know, actually, that's what really resonated with me, because I don't know, all the concepts of God being everywhere or being beyond, I just found it hard to get my head around. But when I experienced myself as a permanent being, a being that's lived before and after this body, and when I sort of learned that I perform action and I carry my story in my subconscious, then I got a clear picture of me, but God is a soul too. That really I could relate to completely, because instantly there was some sort of commonality. And I think the most intrinsic thing to the human psyche is to want to belong, is to want to connect, is to want to have relationship. And so that relationship developed with God as a soul. And it just, that sense of affinity. And God doesn't take birth and rebirth like me. God remains eternally unblemished, clean and pure, is like a benchmark, shall we say. And that even though we go through our story of taking birth and rebirth and seem to accumulate the game of happiness and sorrow. God is beyond that. And the more I connect, in a sense, I begin to take my power back when I connect with God as a soul. It's like a union and absorption of my mind.
So would you say God is a conscious thinking being that creates thoughts, that almost has some kind of divine personality?
Absolutely. To me, God is, you can only love someone who's lovable. And if God is sort of a thing, an it, how can you really connect? How can you really relate? Because as I was saying, I think the human spirit relationship is so intrinsic to a quality life. And at the moment, our relationships are so challenging for a whole host of reasons. But this is a real living relationship which I'm having. It's something which I find is, absolutely real.
So in some ways, I'm getting this sense as you're speaking of a bit like the role that the sun plays in our universe. The sun stays still and everything moves around the sun and is constantly changing. And in a way, from what you're saying, the divine God is the point that is unchanging, around which everything else is swirling.
Absolutely. And that also, I suppose we're all on our own journey, but that felt incredibly comfortable to me. And that I found that when I lay the platform of my life in a connection, a relationship with that which always exists, no matter how much the world changes around me, I can keep my stability, especially at this time. And I found that when I attach my heart to anything or anyone temporary, then that fear of loss and change comes in. And in a way, spirituality is exploring, and it is a big change, but I've been exploring for many years a relationship with myself as an eternal soul, a relationship with God, who's the supreme soul. And no matter how much life changes, that is constant, that is eternally there. And I think it's like a platform that you can build a stable life on those two things as the whole world moves around me. I don't see it as my imagination. To me, it's a very real experience.
Do you have any practical examples? Because you talked about experiencing this connection on a daily basis, every morning and throughout the day. But in what way is this dovetailing with your life as it's lived moment by moment, with all the ups and downs and challenges and upheavals? How do you use that experience, that relationship, to actually help you in your real lived life?
Yes, and I think that's where it really works, because, up until recently, I would always, especially when I talked about this, say that I'm meditating, and meditation is to focus on God. But now I use the word remember. And why? Because sometimes I think even for a lot of us today, even meditation seems like hard work. Coercing your mind into a position. But actually the most natural thing to human consciousness is to remember. And what I'm exploring is that when you remember God, this beautiful radiant light, and in that light is an unlimited ocean of love and peace and purity and truth. Once you connect, you're instantly influenced. And then you download, it's like you live stream that energy into the sacred space of your mind. And so as you go about your life, you carry these feelings. And in the same way, if you remember a family member, instantly you connect. And if the relationship's good, you feel good and you download into the sacred space of your mind good feelings. But if you're going through that conflict, that difficult relationship, you download a negative energy, an uncomfortable energy. And what I'm seeing is that constantly the subtle thread of my intellect keeps connecting with the past and people and situations. So I download this low vibration into my mind and I don't feel good. And what I'm exploring is to keep the subtle thread with the divine, like my lover, like my friend. And the more I do it, it's like I'm under that influence, even though I'm still dealing and managing the things around me in my life. And I often ask the question, if you're not feeling good, if you don't feel happy, if you're feeling insecure or anxious, there's one question to ask: what am I remembering? What am I plugging the subtle thread of my intellect into? And what I've learned here is the more I educate myself to plug into the divine, to God, and move about my life, I'm under that influence and I can keep those lovely feelings in the sacred space of my mind, no matter what's happening around me. And that isn't a selfish thing, because as you know, the more you feel good, you spread a perfume into the atmosphere. You create a vibe around you.
That's very interesting, because this analogy of tuning into someone who you know and feeling their energy, you're saying that the same can happen with the divine, that there is a vibration and energy that is accessible and attainable. Because I think for a lot of people, especially those of us that have grown up in a Western tradition, we're used to that experience of the divine being mediated via a third party, whether it be a priest or a guru or a saint or a holy person. It's okay for them to have these experiences because they're holy, but it's not for the likes of me, just a mere mortal, to tap into that experience of God. And yet you're saying, actually, anybody can.
Anybody can. And, you know, I remember once, Philippa, I was in a temple and I just was observing, you know, that sort of human nature. We see an image of God, or, oh God, you're so great and I'm so, you know, this sort of low, impure, weak. And it just dawned on me so deeply how I've inbuilt this incredible inferiority to God. How can I ever really have a relationship or feel close? And what I've learned, actually, it should be the opposite, that in almost all religions they say we're children of God. A child has a right. And so when I really have the self-respect to sit in front of God, it's my right to have this relationship. And this relationship has an extraordinary healing power. My own experience is that no matter how sort of weak and vulnerable and anxious you feel, when the connection connects, if I can say, and you start to come under that influence, it's like the healing, the life comes back into the self. The self-respect naturally grows. To me, you can go to the libraries, there's 1 million books on how to get my sense of self-value back. The most powerful way is to taste and feel the love of God, the soul's lover. And it's an amazing feeling. I don't have to be religious. I don't have to do all that stuff, actually. I just have a natural relationship of the soul with the parent soul.
So this aspect of self-worth and self-respect and guilt and feeling that I've done bad things in my life, I'm not actually worthy, I'm not good enough, you know, all of this sense of you know, why would God be interested in me? I mean, look at me, I'm a mess. And yet you can get through that, and there is an experience on the other side, if you persist, that you can connect with.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of my biggest lessons has been, I had an experience in my early days of meditating or remembering where I began to see how I saw myself so clearly. It was so low. You know, that ingrained, critical, negative vision and all the stuff of the past. But I had an experience that God's vision was here. And in a way, my duty is to step into that vision, because that vision is actually the reality. My vision is of a temporary vision on myself. To me, the biggest obstacle in coming close to God is this ingrained negative, critical vision of lack of self-respect, where I can't see any value in myself at all. So that sense of inferiority doesn't enable me to experience that connection and feel that love. I don't feel worthy to be loved. And often I say to people, if you really want to explore this connection, wake up early in the morning and sit in silence and sit in front of God, that beautiful form of light, and just allow yourself to be loved. And what is wisdom? Wisdom is observing. Where do I block this love? I'm in front of perfect love. It's real. Where do I block it? And with wisdom, I observe where I block it. And if I remove those blocks, that love can do magic of self-transformation. Absolute magic.
For many people, I think possibly the baby's been thrown out with the bathwater when they look at the state of the world and they see the enormity of human suffering that's going on, of environmental catastrophe that is unfolding. And of course in Australia you've had all the forest fires that have been going on, all the death and destruction that came from that. And there is this question that comes up in people's minds of, how can there be a loving, protecting, guiding principle behind the universe when all of these things happen? I'm wondering what the balance is between the consequence of our own actions as individuals and whether God is actually allowing all of this suffering. How do you square that?
I think it's such a big question in so many people's minds. But, what I feel is that, when we look at what is happening around the world at the moment, I don't think it's God's, responsibility. It's not that God is really performing. These are the results of our actions. And I feel that I am responsible for my actions. But I feel that really God's creation, if you can say, is the transformation of the human spirit. Because when the human spirit changes, I think that will influence everything. And my experience at the moment is that we're at this extraordinary confluence. One way you can put on a lens and see this destructive world that just seems to be careering into chaos and mayhem. On the other hand, wherever I've been in the world, and this can be, in New York or London or somewhere, or villages in Asia or Africa, there's groups of people coming together who are seeing that the world out there is a result of our world. And they're starting to take responsibility that when maybe I have a connection and I change me, I'm contributing to a better world. So to me, I've never sort of found the idea that God is responsible for what happens here. We perform actions, we reap the fruit of our actions. But if I remember God, that influences the seeds of my actions. Those thoughts become elevated. Thoughts are the seeds of actions. I start to be much kinder, much more loving to people around me and people who don't agree with me, people who have a different view. It's okay. I really bring my connection with God into my action.
So if we extrapolate from what you're saying, this kind of breakdown that we're witnessing of so many structures within our societies, that we're striving and reaching out for something new that will rise up on the other side of all of this, that our experience of the divine and how we use that experience to change us, that in itself will bring about the change that our hearts are so longing to see.
Absolutely. I think, Philippa, that what we're seeing out there, that the really fastly changing and even many would feel degrading world, the seed of it is the relationship of 7.5 billion human souls with themselves. That relationship has become, unfortunately, so unhealthy. And so if the first relationship in life is so unhealthy, the way we treat ourselves, how will I treat others? How will I treat society? How will I treat the environment? Until that relationship is repaired, I think nothing is going to change out there. And spirituality really says, yes, begin to sit in silence. Look at this relationship. Learn to be kind and gentle. Learn to experience who you are. And take power from this relationship with the divine to begin to change yourself and heal. Because I think when I respect myself, I can respect others. I can respect society. I can respect the environment. And to me, this is God's creation to heal this first relationship in life. And I think so many people I meet really have come to that conclusion that the mayhem out there is just a reflection of the mayhem inside the human mind, the collective human mind of 7.5 billion souls at the moment. Sometimes I call it the thought soup. You know, we live in this thought soup. Just imagine 7.5 billion souls pumping out thoughts. And I really feel for everybody, because the big question now, what's going to happen? So much anxiety. And we're absorbing this thought soup. We're all absorbing it, and it's just making us all feel so uneasy. And if I can actually step out of it and start to remember God, remember the divine, that's all I have to do. Remember this light and feel that connection and download, live stream that sweet energy into me. It's like my light bulb starts to come, and then I touch another and you touch another, and we start to touch each other, and light starts to come back. And I feel as much as we can see the world going in that direction, at the same time it seems a lot of light is emerging as well. You know, so many people, even in the last month, I found so many people really questioning and starting to explore more deeply what is happening inside of me, what do I need to do, and even open to the idea of a relationship with God.
So I wonder if that is possibly a silver lining to this whole experience, that there is a correlation between feeling some pain, some discomfort, some suffering even, that we almost have to hit the bottom of the barrel and reach a place where we're desperate enough to look outside of ourselves and be open to reaching out to something. And I'm wondering if that could be a message for someone who's listening to this, who really feels like they are in a very dark place, that they have possibly lost their job, they've possibly lost loved ones, that somehow from this experience of loss and desperation, that can be a springboard. It's almost like a road bump that jolts you out of your everyday life, and you can use that experience to question and go more deeply than you might ever have done otherwise.
You know, I think you expressed that so beautifully, because, you know, we're funny, we're creatures of habit. We're in this sort of incredibly routine sort of, you know, rat race, and so many times we question, you know, why am I involved in this? I want peace, I want silence. But now we're having the peace and silence. I think it's a bit scary in some ways, because the busyness, the distractions has a purpose. It stops me from looking deep. Who am I really? And what is really important in life? And it is a bit scary. It is a bit uncomfortable. But if I have the courage to sit with that question, I think, you know, if you explore your permanent self, the soul, and just open, you know, a relationship with God might not be my thing, but why not explore and see whether this might be a lifeline that out of this whole sort of drama happening in the world at the moment, the time of lockdown, I may explore a whole new way of seeing myself and a whole new lens on what is really important in life. So I think you put it beautifully. There's a silver lining in what is happening spiritually.
But what is so interesting is that up until this point, it's been individuals who have been going through their individual grieving process or journey of loss, whether it be through, illness or bereavement or some personal loss. But what's happening at the moment is that it's a global phenomenon. It's happening in countries right around the world. And I wonder what you feel the consequence of this global experience might be going into the future.
It's very hard to say, but I'm sure the world will be a different place. But I do feel so many people are really asking that big question, what is really important? And maybe to go in this silent time, this time of quiet, to go back to the basics. What is the purpose of life? And to me, to know who I am and to really build loving relationships with others and the divine. This is really what a quality of life is. And often we get so sidetracked with limited desires and so on. So I think there's a lot of benefit coming out of this scenario. How it will emerge into the future, it's anyone's guess at the moment. But my sense is it's going to become more and more unstable, our world. And so it's more and more important for us to develop some practice, to develop some sort of inner stability. And to me, inner stability is to know my permanent self and to know the divine. And when those two pieces of the jigsaw are there, they're solid. In my view, they're solid. And so as the world shakes, you can remain stable, and your stability will support so many people. Your stability just by being who you are. You don't even have to say anything. Just by being in your self-respect, experiencing who you are, and having that loving connection, it creates a vibration. And I feel that if, we can play that part into the future, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful part to play in life.
Well, that feels to me like the perfect point to just take a pause and actually go into an experience of what it is that you're talking about here, this idea of there being something in this world of change that is unchanging, that is eternal, that we can, in a sense, hang our hat on it and know that it will be there. So Charlie, if you could just lead us into a few moments of meditation just to round off our conversation for today, that would be really perfect. Thank you.
So I'd really love to thank you, Philippa. It's been so lovely talking to you, me sitting at night time in Sydney and you in the morning in London. But I'd really love to invite all those who are listening to, maybe put things down and sit quietly just for these few moments. And I'm just going to offer a few thoughts that may open me to the connection with the divine. Let me sit quietly. And in this silence, visualize your permanent self, the soul, a tiny spark of life energy that sits in the front of the brain in the center of the forehead. Just very gently feel yourself withdrawing, stepping back from all the labels your body represents. your gender, your nationality, your profession, and just feel yourself sitting so lightly in the forehead, beyond all the labels of your body. I, the peaceful soul. Just feel the speed of your mind cooling down, and this fragrance, this incredibly sweet fragrance of a mind at rest, fills my inner world. And in this soul-conscious state, I come in front of the light of the divine. Through the eye of your mind, visualize a radiant jewel of light, the Supreme Soul. An unlimited source of peace, of love, of purity and power. Just focus naturally towards this beautiful light. And absorb your mind. And allow yourself to be completely loved. Just feel this divine love emanating, radiating, and feel it entering the core of your being. Become like a small child, so open. Feel this love healing me, caressing me. And the more I fill with this pure love, I feel so still, so silent. I feel full, I have what I need. And my mind feels like a sweet perfume of silence and love. And my mind radiates this to all my brothers and sisters in the world. My human family struggling with this present situation. This connection with the divine is only a thought away. At any moment, all I have to do is remember the radiant jewel, the ocean of love. And as soon as I connect, I come under that influence and everything is okay. If each morning I wake, I sit quietly, I reconnect with my true self, and then connect with the divine. Just watch how your life changes. To do this regularly is an act of love for myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlie. That was absolutely beautiful, and I love the thought that a feeling of connection with the divine is simply a thought away. And you have certainly given us so much to go away and think about. And I really hope that our conversation, our masterclass conversation today, will act as a catalyst to keep you thinking and keep exploring and keep experiencing what is possible when we have this intention that we actually want to open up and experience what is there and what is there for me in this time, in this difficult time for all of us, that perhaps there is a source of eternal power and strength in these difficult times. Charlie, I thank you so much for your time and wish you and all the work that you're doing in Australia all the best as we move forwards. And it would be lovely to connect with you again one day soon. But for now, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Philippa. It was a delight. Thank you.
Wonderful. And thank you to you for tuning in and being part of this energy that we've created here today in today's masterclass. I really hope you've enjoyed it and that you'll join us again tomorrow as we take another deep dive into another one of our masterclasses in new consciousness. Until then, take care, look after yourself, keep safe, Om Shanti, and goodbye. "21 Masterclasses in New Consciousness. New ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you." Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world.